Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Our guest today is Thomas Miller. He is a family and parenting coach, and he serves clients of all ages. He is a licensed clinical social worker. Thomas, welcome to the show today.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, look, I'm looking forward to our conversation. But first, a reminder to our listeners and our viewers, follow, like, and share this podcast wherever you find it. Your support matters and is appreciated. Thomas, man, I'm so glad to be able to meet today. I've been battling COVID. I'm not sure if you've had that experience or not, but it's not fun.
Yeah, it is not fun. I have had that
Yeah.
experience far too many times, unfortunately. Yeah.
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 Okay, well, we're going to surely have a great conversation about what you do. And I tell you, I've been looking forward to talking with you just because of the world and because of all of the things that happen all over the globe, in relationships and families, between countries and the like. My first question to you, though, is why did you choose social work?
Oh, wow. That is the OG question. The quick and easy answer is want to serve, want to make an impact. Why I still do, I guess, is probably a better answer. This work, having done it since 1999, at least when I entered social work, the field, is because I love, seeing people dig deep, lean in. Big fan of people getting in the arena, right, and having agency
Mhm.
to make a powerful shift happen in their life. So it's a done with you sort of service, if you will, rather than a done for you service. So I love the idea of each and every client is unique and different, and we have every client has a different starting point. But I love helping, again, clients step into courage and lean in and call out of their own unique situation, an opportunity. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that, Richie. I like that response. Hey, look, sometimes people choose a profession and they draw from some of their own adversities and experiences. And I'm just curious, what about you yourself? Have you had any experience in adversity that really called you towards social work?
Yes, yeah, I think I think everybody in this field has a personal reason. I mean, I like to believe I'm altruistic in my approach, but of course we all have a unique I wouldn't even call it selfish, but personal
Mm,
reason. So in high school, I definitely endured
mm,
a lot of bullying because I was very athletic. I played soccer, I played in college, got a soccer scholarship, but I also was very artistic. So back in the 90s, you couldn't be athletic and into art. You had to be one or the other, and homophobia was very much alive and well in my experience. So that was definitely one of the things that was a motivator for me, is to try to make kind of macro change, right, and to help
mm.
people who are struggling, of course, with systemic racism or systemic homophobia or systemic issues. And then also, of course, I have family patterns that definitely have motivated me to take a look at how can I, right, set my family up for success, and how can I help other families. There is no, as you know, perfect family. Every single family
Yeah.
is a dysfunctional family,
Yeah.
generational. Everything is a lot of times generational trauma, right?
Mhm.
Generational patterns. So taking a look at from a micro and macro perspective, of my family, yeah, there's that was very motivating to try to,
Mhm.
help other families as well, maybe, level up or 10x themselves, right? So my personal
Yeah.
experience, and of course I have, my father died in a very traumatic way when I
Oh
was
my.
28, which is not, I was already in the field, but of course you ask what adversities have I
Mhm.
had? I think it is a full contact sport life, right? So
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
so of course, all those things are helpful. But I don't believe you
Oh.
have to have gone through the same iconic experience as your clients. I mean,
Mhm.
I've worked with
Right.
people of, communities of color. I'm not gay or lesbian. in terms of my identification, I identify as straight, I'm married, but yet I was the director of a gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered program for youth, which again has to do with, kind of the parallel of my high school experience and trying to help, kids learn, right, without having the external factors of that rob them of that educational experience. So yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I wouldn't say everything I've done is correlated to my life, but of course, I mean, how you wouldn't be, I don't think, a good human or a good therapist or a good friend or a good father or a good human, right? If you didn't draw in a good way, right, from your own experiences.
I got you. Look, you just unloaded a lot in that comment.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to help try to unpack some of it because there's some gems there. If we don't get to all of it today, we'll have to come back for another conversation because you just
sure.
You just blew me away there. But look, but your focus, though, your passion, as I read you, is around parenting and children. And why that?
Well, as someone who's been treating folks licensed since 2002, I always feel like I get to see what the evolution of, say, this issue or this symptom is going to be. So I've worked with, of course, tons of people who are older population, but the fact that you can get in there, if you will, right, and help the families create a culture. I'm a big culture guy. Culture wins championships, right? So I believe that family culture really is a huge determinant, right, of obviously the epigenetics, so to speak, or the expression of so much. And so to help families, be able to co-regulate with their child or exhaust certain maladaptive patterns or not be codependent, right? Not be laissez-faire, really help parents have situational awareness, really understanding like each and every child in each and every situation requires a different tact and tone. That's really exciting, right? Because we're dealing with the trajectory of that family and or that child. And I see so many families, even if the child is successful or goes to a treatment program or a therapeutic school, if the family's not careful, they'll recapitulate back to all of those dynamics. So helping the family to stay well and stay up and hold on to the gains is really exciting to me.
I tell you what, I'm so glad you work with families and children because as I've aged and matured, let me ask the question this way. Is a healthy family a gateway to health and happiness in other areas of life?
Yeah. I mean, it's not to say, not yes. I mean, it's not to say that, people, I've worked with tons of people, of course, who come from, again, I think every family has an element of dysfunctionality, but incredibly dysfunctional, entrenched, family dynamics. And of course, they have leaned in and done an amazing job to call out of, to declutter some of those norms that were given to them. But yes, if you're coming from a healthy culture, you're going to be that much more, able to raise your hand in class, right? You think about a child who comes from a situation that's, whether it's a foster system adoption or there's any kind of attachment difficulties, is that child going to be that much more apt to advocate for themselves? They're not going to want to be seen or be heard, or they're going to be hyper aroused, and so being seen or heard too much, right? So yes, absolutely. Attachment and culture, I think, really is a great, framework or foundation, right, to set any kid up for success. So that's what I try to help families do. Yeah.
Yeah. And not only, I'm sure you not only set the kid up for success, but also it may foster a degree of happiness and contentment with parents, right? Having
Absolutely.
a nucleus that works. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many parents that feel guilty because unconsciously or even consciously, they don't like who their child's become. And their child, if you will, is a Frankenstein, if you will, of their creation. And so, the first thing we have to do is, or I have to do with families, is like help them, feel whatever they feel and normalize that it's okay to, of course, they all love their children, of course, but it's okay to also like be annoyed at your child or feel guilty that you feel annoyed at your child or internally even want to ignore or avoid your child. But how do we get over that? And then how do we begin to brick by brick, right, little by little, micro habit by micro habit, begin to make shift? And my favorite thing is, when a family is able to stand amidst their child's storm in a much more unflappable way, and to become the master of their emotions, to then model the way forward for their child, even if their child's behavior is still not, super regulated yet. We have to start with the parent, because as you know, if the parent is not, able to model right, that's only going to exacerbate that child's anxiety and make things worse. Yeah.
That's for sure. Hey,
Yeah.
look, I view people like yourself, as light workers, you mental health professionals, because you help us so much. So I want to look at mental health broadly. I know that
Okay.
I'm not asking you to examine the whole world, but
Yeah.
just play along with me. So when I thought about our conversations, people are up against some things. And I want to list a few things that I think people are up against, and just kind of give us your take on what people are
Okay.
dealing with. Okay. All right. The
Okay.
first thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is anxiety. What causes this in our culture today, and what are some things that people can do about it?
Huge macro question. I like it, broad to narrow. I think there's so many sources. I will just speak to, of course, with teens, particularly, the impact of social media, right? I mean, you have um, children are being exposed to lifestyles all over the world now, right? When I was growing up, my exposure level, if you will, was the kids on my block, and every year my radius, if you will, or geographic, space got bigger, maybe a few blocks, right? You could go a little bit further. Now, the fact that a child, living in whatever state in the US could be comparing themselves to a child in another state, and that it creates a lot of anxiety, because there's so much comparative analysis going on, where kids are feeling less than, right? And so many kids are comparing themselves to somebody else who's deeper into their story. I see this a lot with young adults too. I work with a lot of families that have the classic failure to launch. They withdrew from college because they weren't a billionaire. They didn't have a Bugatti. They don't have it all figured out, being sort of exaggerated. But believe me, it's there. I mean, when you look at some entrepreneur who's posting on Instagram at 21 and looks like they have the world at their feet, and then you're struggling with even just how do you get out of bed, that's very difficult, right? So I'm not saying that's the only reason, but just to point to a very concrete one. And what can people do? Well, they can begin to take a hard look at what they can and cannot control. So one of the first exercises I do with anyone is draw a circle, write down all the things in the circle that you actually can control. And that's everything from your breath to your thoughts to whether you go outside for a 20-minute walk. Just the other day, I said to a client, can you do 6 push-ups? They were like, no, I can't do 6 push-ups. I'm like, bull crap. I know you can do 6 push-ups. Come on, let's go. Sure enough, they did 9. You know what I mean? So even as simple as like 9 push-ups doesn't make you an ultra marathoner, or doesn't make you an elite athlete, but that's 9 more push-ups than them spinning. So another thing I think that's very important is concrete behavioral solutions for people with anxiety, because a lot of people will analyze, paralyze. And as you know, right, when you're in your head all the time, you're not really in your body. And it only allows some of those fear-based narratives to gestate further. So even as simple as meeting someone for coffee is a step in a positive direction. Obviously, going to an AA meeting if you struggle with, addiction, or NA, whatever that is. So I think that the easy thing is to try to keep your world a little bit, not as bombarded by social media and the comparative analysis. And then also look at, again, what do you control today? And it may be as simple as put your foot on the next right rock, or avoid that relationship that's toxic or unhealthy, set a boundary there, or be more open to a, community-based resource. So just availing yourself, I think, in real time can immediately do wonders for anxiety.
I like it.
Yeah.
Another one that occurs to me is depression. And I'm telling you, I live in
Mm-hmm.
South Carolina and I'm around a lot of people. And it seems like depression is just running rampant. Gosh, what's going on? Depression. Why are we so depressed?
Again, huge questions. I think if you're isolating, right? I mean, that's not going to help, right? So
Mm.
I'm a big fan, again, of lifestyle. I really believe lifestyle is not the cause of every disease, but as we know from a medical standpoint, it's the cause of a high percentage of most diseases. So, to break that isolation, whether it's, we know from the research, right, whether it's petting a dog, right, increases our mood. Endorphins are released, right, when
Yeah.
we exercise, when we laugh, right? So, of course, someone who's depressed can avail themselves of therapy, and they can work on, cognitive behavioral therapy or
Mhm.
mindfulness work or other kinds of very evidence-based modalities, as well as they can obviously avail themselves of psychiatry, but also looking at other holistic modalities from yoga to acupuncture to movement. But again, I'm just a big fan of like keep it simple. I mean, I
Mm.
believe food is medicine. I believe sleep is
Yeah.
medicine. I think that's a big one too. I mean, especially with teens and young adults, I see so many teens that are not regulated in terms of their sleep cycles. And if
Mm.
you're not sleeping, then you're not replenishing those neurotransmitters. So you could be
Mm.
on the highest dose of an antidepressant. If you're not sleeping, right, you're not able to replenish those
Mm.
stores of norepinephrine, serotonin, or dopamine. So yeah, when I work with people, it's very much like, what can we do today? What
Yeah.
would make this better by this afternoon? So everyone's situation is unique. And I do think, yes, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of depression in the
Mm.
world.
Mm.
And I do think people need to, again, really stop comparing themselves to the
Yeah.
next person and
Yeah.
really focus on what they have endured or what they are
Mhm.
overcoming or what they
Mhm.
can do, and try to take power back over like a
Yeah.
fatalistic worldview. Yeah.
I really like what you have to say because what you remind me of is that, there are things that we can do. That is, if a person is
Hmm.
depressed and they feel there's nothing that I can do. But
Hmm.
what I've heard you say is that there's something that you can do. Something, it maybe in
100%.
my case, could be as simple as I'm going to call someone who I know likes me,
Sure.
and have a nice
Absolutely.
conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah. No,
So,
absolutely. I agree. I mean, even the idea of when someone says I'm depressed, one of the things I like asking sometimes is how depressed, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like, or someone who has OCD, you know, yes, you have OCD, you're struggling with obsessional thinking and
mm,
intrusive thoughts, but believe it or not, this afternoon, your OCD might not be so bad, or your depression, believe it or not, might be worse than it was yesterday, but it might actually be better than it was 4 weeks ago. So things
mm,
do move. And I think what happens is people get in this like chronic paradigm or worldview, and even just changing again the narrative, whether it's a new
mm,
mantra, catching an old
mm,
ineffective thought,
mm.
replacing that with a new more positive thought, 100%
Yeah.
can make a dent. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'm an old man. I've lived a long time. What I've come to learn is that one mind that can't be trusted is a mind that's not thinking right. If you're
Mm,
already depressed
yeah,
and you're trying to make an appraisal of yourself, you can't
sure.
trust that mind, right, Thomas?
100%. That's a great point. I mean, and then if you add on top of that, that mind that is not sleeping, or that mind that might be self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, right? You're dealing with an impaired brain.
Mhm.
Which is why when I'm coaching families that have a loved one who has co-occurring issues, right? Like mental health and substance abuse, it's amazing how much value they'll give to what that person will say. And again, I'm not
Mhm.
in any way encouraging people to not care what their loved one says. But when
Yeah.
someone's in active addiction, it is not a rational thought process, right? Which is
Oh
why
my
we do
gosh.
have to have, as parents, what I call gift of command.
Yeah.
Parenting, I always say, I'm a big fan of listening to my kids and giving them voice and choice, but it is not a democracy. You know what I mean?
I
Like
got you.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like we can negotiate, we could talk, we could barter, but I need to be, appropriately here and they need to be
Yeah.
here.
Uh-huh.
So it's amazing how parents almost over elevate um,
Yeah.
their children, and that again can
Yeah.
actually be anxiety provoking to the child.
Yeah, I like that. But there's a lot there too. We'll come back to that though. But let me go back to my list because back in the 90s, social phobia, maybe it still is, but social phobia was a big topic of
Oh
conversation.
yeah.
Is that still going on? Do people still talk about social phobia and people write books about that?
Oh, big time. I mean, I have like CEOs that struggle with more on the performance side. You know what I mean?
Oh,
They're not, it's not so much that they can't interact with a person on a day in and day out basis.
Mm.
But absolutely, there's a lot of people around, performance anxiety, around public speaking,
Yeah.
etc. And then, of course, one of the worst things you could do, which I have so many families this way that reach out to me after these things have really become giant sized, is let's say a child had they were bullied, or there was a negative traumatic experience, or just
Mm.
they faced some adversity. And next thing you know, that family's homeschooling. And I'm not anti-homeschool, just be
Yeah.
clear. But in this case, it's not healthy, because now you're trying to take down the symptoms that have been able to brood for, let's say,
Mm.
6 months, 9 months, a year. I mean, I had a family not that long ago where they removed their child for about 2 years from school.
Mm.
Now you're trying to go back to that same environment to face that same stimulus, so much harder. So
Mm.
yes, there's a lot of evidence-based modalities for social phobia,
Mm.
from, again, mindfulness, exposure work, again, cognitive behavioral. There's a lot of opportunities and application, and the family can be really helpful to,
Mm.
again, challenge that child, not again in a forceful way, but in a supportive, emotional way, to lean in, right, to
Yeah.
some of these things that would be challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to leave my list for a moment, and I want to look now at your specialty, parents and children, for a little while. We'll come back to my list. You've already mentioned that there's a degree of dysfunction in many families.
Mhm.
Is that just the way it is, or what? I mean, why did you say that?
You ask these really good questions. I think that's the way it is. I mean, I think number one, parenting is I don't know if are you a parent?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so I mean, it is the hardest job in the world. And
It
as
is.
much as there is so many more uh resources now than there ever was, which is great. At times of stress, what do? We default back on these things, right? And as you know, right, when our midbrain is firing, our limbic system's in overdrive, and we're in that fight or flight, right? Or freeze, we're not the most effectual parents. So, we've all, myself included, as many tools as I have, and I use them often, which that I give to families, it's moments I have that because stressed
Mhm.
out. So I think that that's actually, on some level, in a weird way, helpful to a lot of parents. I see a lot of parents that are trying to be like the Pinterest or perfect Instagram
Yeah, yeah.
family, and they're removing themselves from being innate or organic, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Like, yes, there are ancient wisdom. Yes, there
Mhm.
is some new thinking, and we should merge the two.
Mhm.
But this idea of like being a robotic mom or dad, I don't think is healthy for a kid.
Yeah.
So, and I always tell families, like myself included, I will go to my kids and be like, let's just start the day again. Like, let's just
Yeah.
start again.
That's good.
Like
That's
100%
wonderful.
my bad. Like,
Yeah.
I use the oops and ouch. It's like the most
Yeah.
basic thing in the world. Like, if my
Uh,
kid says something, I'll just be like, ouch, like that hurt, man.
yeah.
Like, that was pretty rough. That's an opportunity for him to be like, my bad, right? And he may or may not
Yeah.
do that. I have two boys. There's tons of times I have to go to my kids and be like, look, my bad. I totally like kind of came in over the top, or I didn't kind of give you an opportunity to redeem yourself. You know what I mean? I went to
Mm.
the nuclear option. So again, yes, families have an element of dysfunctionality. And again, I've worked with the gamut. I mean, there's tons of families
Mm.
that, we're talking chaotic,
Mhm.
all kinds of substance abuse and bipolarity and whatever
Mm.
else. But then again, just the typical family, I think, has an element of
Mm.
dysfunctionality. And anybody who wants to be growth oriented should be open to being like, we're pretty good, but how do we go to great? And then
Yeah.
those are the families I love working with, right? But
Yeah.
I'll work with the families that are mired in the
Yeah.
deep in the trenches too, of course, every day. But it's nice when you're not functioning from trauma and you're trying to
Mhm.
think about growth, you know?
Yeah. I like it when you talk about your children, and I've seen it elsewhere where you've written or spoken. Your ability to be transparent. It's like, here's what I get from you. It's like, I'm human. I can be a
Yeah,
human, and boy, that seems so healthy for a kid to see a
yeah,
parent who can be a human.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
Here- yeah. Here's something else I want to throw out at you. You've been laughing at me with this one. but I'm going to
Hmm.
take you to, I'm going to make it biblical for just a moment. And this is not about
It's
religion,
fun.
but it's biblical, okay?
It's fun.
If you think of God as a parent, the God in the Bible, Old Testament as a parent,
Hmm.
God had a son, Adam.
Hmm.
Then God had a dysfunctional family from the start. What do
Hmm.
you think about
Hmm.
that? Am I not still looking at it that way?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think first off, whether someone's religious or not religious, there's value in looking at, of course, the Bible in any situation to glean from. Um, I mean, I actually used to be way back when was a youth minister, so pretty steeped in looking at different biblical stories and I think the thing there is like there's a lot of creation and decreation in the Bible. I think that's an
Mm.
easier way of thinking about it. Like God's like, hey, here's this cool thing, and then we mess it up, you know? And then it's like, hey, here's this cool thing, we mess it up, right? So I do
Yeah,
think there is a lot of opportunity for lack of a better word, I think redemption in the Bible.
yeah, yeah,
I do think there's a message of hope there,
yeah,
that we're not doomed forever, and that we're very fallible people.
yeah,
And we need, to me, we need, guides. We need mirrors. I need mirrors held up on me. I need
yeah,
I need community. I need accountability partners. I love constructive feedback. People that are defensive, are some of the most insecure people in the world, right? So what's up
yeah,
with that, right? That's something for
yeah.
them to look at.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, so we've already established that, there's some dysfunction in most families. I won't say all, most families. Let me ask you, Thomas, what are some things that parents are up against? Now, let me just preface it before you
Hmm.
answer. Heck, we become parents without a manual. We're just parents. We buy
Hmm.
a car, we get a
Hmm.
manual, but we just become parents. What are some things that parents are up against?
Oh my God. I mean, I think now it's very hard. Again, I just will go back to social media. I'm not anti-social media. I do think you can help your child navigate social media, but like with anything, we have to help our kids, monitor the dosage of social media. And I think parents now, number one, how the next person is parenting, their kids' friends. I think that parents have become weak. I mean, that's just the quick
Mm,
and easy answer. I think as a whole, parenting, I've never seen parenting be weaker. I think there is way too much mollycoddling and there's way too much, again, there's like these extremes where you still have, of course, the attached family, of course, that just, there's not
yeah.
a really great attachment there. But the level of enmeshment and codependency that I see
Mhm.
is beyond anything I've ever seen. This idea of families trying to create an outcome for their child and not letting their child face adversity is really challenging. And I think when that's being normalized, which it is, that is hard for the parent, like myself and my wife and of other people who are like, wait a minute, you know what I mean? Like we want our kids to feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable. We want our kids to feel, I'm not talking trauma, but I'm talking
Mhm.
this idea of trying to, wipe away any potential barrier or adversity, I think is
Mhm.
very problematic. And I think that's very normalized right now. And I do think that
Mhm.
is very much being popularized. So I do think that's a factor that's very challenging for these parents that are truly parenting,
Yeah,
that are
yeah,
standing up against that and being
yeah.
like, yes, we want our kids to feel safe, but we don't want to remove every single speed bump or every single issue that our child will ever face. In fact, that's
Right.
doing them a disservice.
Yeah. Can we as parents create champions? I'm thinking of Tiger Woods' father or Denise and Venus Williams, father. You know what I mean? So can we do that as parents, or is our job simply to expose and nourish and see what happens?
I think again, I would just say culture. I think we could bring a
Mm,
culture, we could build the best culture that the ROI of that culture,
mm,
right, could be the champion, if you will. I mean, I don't know how much you know about Tiger Woods' upbringing, but it's not all good, in that sense. Like, yes, he helped him be who he is, in terms of golf, but there was also some pretty negative modeling there too.
mm,
So it depends on what are we trying to achieve or what is even the rubric of what a champion is. I would like to say that we as parents can absolutely create a safe deep connection with our kids that fosters resiliency, and we can be accompanying them through their journey without, again, jumping into the arena and fighting every battle for them, but also without being aloof. And I see these extremes where you have, the mother or father who is working 75 hours a week
Yeah.
and they've exported parenting to somebody else. Or then I see these families that are, so codependent and enmeshed that the child then again is in their own snow globe and not able to
Yeah.
kind of do that. So I think we could build a culture that again is about witnessing and honoring the child's
Mhm.
emotional life and but without again having it to be a parallel process to what we experience. I think so many families over-identify with their kids' success and or failures.
Mhm.
And I think again, if you create a healthy, safe, connected, fail forward culture, that's a big thing I'm a fan of, is helping
Yeah.
kids fail forward, then they are a
Mhm.
champion or they'll become a
Yeah.
champion. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I got you. That's great.
Yeah.
Feeling safe, that seems to be so important, not only for children, but for parents. But I want to ask you this about children. How can we help children feel safe in a world sometimes that's not
Yeah.
safe?
Yeah. I think it starts with allowing and normalizing whatever it is they feel. And it's funny, a
Mhm.
lot of families who are old school that I work with that didn't have the ability, they weren't given the space to express their feeling. It was more seen and not
Yeah.
heard.
Mhm.
Um, that childhood. They think sometimes validating that a kid's feelings is not, I always say, it's not authenticating their actions, if that makes sense. So if a kid
Mhm.
is like, I can't stand this kid in school, I'm having a really hard time with this teacher, it doesn't mean you're like, yeah, go cut class, or like it's okay you hit that kid. It just like
Mhm.
that sounds hard, that sounds really challenging, but we can still hold the line and hold them accountable at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think
Mhm.
to create safety is many things. I do think it's validating the child's emotional world. I also think it's having parameters. Again, I see a lot of families that they don't have clear parameters for that child. And
Mhm.
that again is they're almost what's called parentifying that child. They're elevating
Yeah.
that child to a parent status, which is very anxiety provoking. So you need to couch your kid's world appropriately. It shouldn't be too
Mhm.
small, but it shouldn't be
Mhm.
too big. And it should be again based on their age, their development, and also what they can and cannot handle.
Mhm. Gosh, it seems like, what you're saying to me is that, look, the child is growing up as a child, but as a parent, you'll have to mature and grow and develop
Mm-hmm.
yourself in
Yes.
order to, raise
Yes.
a healthy child. Yeah.
And every kid's different, which is so hard, right? Like what worked with one kid does not work with the
Mhm.
next. And what worked last year doesn't work, this month. So yes, absolutely, you have to hit the refresh button all the time as a parent.
Yeah. You've mentioned social media already, and I want you to talk more about the kinds of things that children are up against because we've talked about the things that parents are up against, but gosh, children are up against some stuff in this life as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, I don't. Where you grew up in South Carolina? You said.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So I mean,
Yeah, I grew up in rural South Carolina in the
right. So
sticks.
I didn't grow up in the sticks, but again, I would assume that your childhood was similar, where there was always maybe that kid who had a little bit more than the next kid, and maybe there's a
That's
kid who
right.
had a little less, but
Hey,
it
Thomas,
wasn't.
that's for sure.
Right, but I'm saying it wasn't that your exposure was to millions and millions of lifestyles. I mean, the fact that a child is watching some influencer who is a multimillionaire,
Mhm.
you know, do this or talk about this or that, that it has no reference point to their local experience, but that's the child,
Mhm.
that's what kids are up against. So again, there's such a overexposure of it's almost too much information for children to
Yeah.
process. And then that turns them into, well, I'm not good, right? And
Yeah.
then the idea of why would I even start on this journey? Because I'm never going to get to that. Versus like I'm always saying to kids or adults, like you're running your own race. Like as long as you
Yeah.
beat you of like last month, you've won. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
just, can we just be better than we were 6 months ago? Like great, versus
Mhm.
like trying to be whoever the perfect, you know, role model
Yeah.
person is. So I think kids have that. There's too much exposure, too much too much options. And then again, like we talked about already, if parents are not couching their world appropriately
Mhm.
and helping them realize that they should have, again, I'm a big fan of, voice and choice, empowering kids to have
Mhm.
appropriate amount of input. But no, they shouldn't be just deciding, every little thing and what are we having for dinner tonight? Well, I actually prefer
Yeah,
this and I
yeah,
prefer that and I
yeah,
don't want that. And it's like,
yeah,
you could be like, do you want potato or sweet potato? Do you want
yeah,
carrots or do you want, broccoli? That's cool, but it shouldn't be this child is
yeah.
that empowered, right?
Yeah. I tell you, you got me thinking about the social media thing because I had an experience just last week. I'll be, and I'm sure kids face the same kind of thing. I was doing some social media stuff and I saw a couple of youngsters in their mid-20s and then already millionaires.
Sure.
I said, wait a minute, how did they do
Right.
that? I
Right.
began to look at
Exactly.
myself. I said, wait a minute.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
children can also
A
compare,
hundred
right,
percent,
Thomas?
100%.
Uh,
I mean, and
uh-huh.
there's nothing wrong with you and myself as well. I have a personal brand too,
Yeah,
wanting to learn and be growth oriented. And how did they do that? And let me try to learn those mechanisms because successful people do leave breadcrumbs. But where it
yeah,
gets unhealthy is like I'm a piece of
yeah, yeah.
garbage because I'm not that
Mhm.
thing. And again, the level of exposure is so big. It's just so big. And then with Snapchat, this idea of anonymity, when in fact nothing's really anonymous because people
Mhm.
screenshot. And then the cyberbullying is a huge issue that kids are up against.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
everything is documented. Like, I don't know about you, but I did some dumb crap as a kid that thank God there was no phones, that were also
Right.
recording devices, like
Yeah.
I have a very small footprint, thank God, in terms of my
Mm.
childhood, you know what I mean? But like
Mm.
everything you do is documented these days as a child.
Yeah. That's
It's
yeah.
crazy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Thomas, that's I'm thinking about this subject here. Like, okay, we got all of this stuff going on. There is some dysfunction. We got social media, but how can a parent from confidence
Right,
as opposed because
right.
a lot of other stuff will seep in, right, Thomas, like limiting beliefs about it, but how can they
Yeah.
parent from confidence?
I mean, that's a great question and a great point. And I would say that's what I do is that I help
Mm,
families, as I was saying earlier, be unflappable amidst their child's storm. So
mm,
if there's a storm happening, but you could hear your own voice and you can know this is why I'm on this path and this is my North Star. My North Star is helping this child become more resilient. Well, if they're falling apart because I said no, that they can't go to that party because you don't really trust the parents at that house and there's poor supervision, what I mean? That's helpful. Or even just yesterday, I was working with this family who the child is grieving the loss of a loved one, and they're fighting
mm,
the inclination, which I'm helping them to, basically cede ground to whatever this child's impulses are now
mm,
because they are grieving and they've lost an actual, real person, and that's
mm.
sad and horrible. But the last thing we want is a grieving child that's now entitled. So how do you,
Yeah.
honor their grief, but hold these these boundaries?
Yeah.
And when parents are able to know, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing, it makes all
Mm,
the difference because versus I'm just going to throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks and not really
mm,
be able to even evaluate if it's effective.
mm.
So I help families, I give them 23 years of clinical experience. I
Yeah.
back it up to their doorstep and give them a done with you process that we go on a journey from basically current situation, right, to higher
Yeah.
functioning, healthier culture. Yeah.
Sounds good to me. I
Yeah.
like what you do. Right. I like what you do for sure.
Thank you.
One last question for now, and because I think I got to bring you back maybe 2025 because there's so much beyond getting to. Um, but my last question is this, because we want kids to be healthy and confident. How do we grow self-esteem in children? How do we do that?
That's such a good question. I mean, I would say if you could do anything ever, as a parent, it would be that, right? Because self-esteem actually doesn't mean they get a trophy. Self-esteem
Mm,
doesn't mean they've won. Self-esteem doesn't mean they have every outcome. Self-esteem is that they are impervious, right, to the wins and the losses. And
mm,
I think what we could do there, of course, is helping our kids not have an inner critic. A lot of kids I work with who are very like type A or perfectionistic will be like hitting themselves with the shame stick every time they mess up.
Yeah.
So you could help to change that to be, again, more resilient and less outcome based. You also can help kids help self-esteem by encouraging them toward whatever their passions are. I mean, there's tons of kids that are not traditional learners, but are incredibly
Yeah.
intelligent. Just because you're
Yeah.
not getting an A+ in school doesn't mean you're not incredibly, intelligent. So if a kid is into something that's different than your childhood, get excited about that, whether it's, karate, or it's ceramics, or it is athletics, or it's hiking, or it's yoga, whatever that is. So helping a child to really be passionate. I think a passion is one of the most important things, because
Yeah.
so many people that don't have a passion are more apt, right, to be depressed. And when you care about your guitar, or you care about, your soccer team, or whatever that is, even if you're like dealing with anxiety and depression, it still forces you to think about something bigger than yourself. So helping kids have passions, getting excited about what the kids are excited about, helping them again to be more process versus outcome focused, right? Like if you're a coder, the kid's into coding, they're going to mess up. If a kid's into building Legos, they're going to break. You know what I mean? They're into karate, you're going to lose a match. So less outcome, more process, more being in love with the process of developing themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I know your clients enjoy talk with you. Let me ask you this last. That was my last question, but I lied. And look, so is there anything else that you want to share with parents or children before we sign off today?
Sure. Just that, I think big changes are possible, but they start with a really small micro step. And I would really encourage people to try, as we've already kind of talked about, to play their own game, to really figure out what does their version of excellence look like. And it may be as simple as, again, if they thought they could do 6 push-ups, they did 9. Well, can they do 10 2 weeks from now? And really doing a lot of pats on the back, and really trying to declutter any kind of people, places, or things that are kind of hanging on them. And so again, the family that's mindlessly scrolling on Instagram, looking for this solution outside themselves, or the child doing that, they're missing this opportunity that's called working with this awesome space around them, and using all the amazing innate resources, as well as, of course, therapy, coaching, soccer, basketball coach, pastor, whoever, but really taking kind of a prune back approach and decluttering some of the noise, because it's a very noisy world. And I think once families, parents, really try to look at, where am I trying to go? Let me orient there. And it may not happen overnight. Same thing with the child. That's exciting, because now you're on your own path, and you're making volitional choices. So
I love it. Well,
yeah.
there you have it, folks.
Yeah, well, thank you.
You've been listening. Look, this has been a joy. Thank you, sir. Well, you've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Thomas Miller. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Until next time, good day